Alright guys, welcome back to my channel, and you're watching From Nisha's View, and of course I'm Nisha. And on my channel, if this is your first time tuning in, catching me, I talk about fashion and I talk about photography. And so today we are on the photography side, and I like to call it Photography Talk with Nisha. Yeah, so what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about the exposure triangle. That means balancing that ISO, that shutter, and that aperture. Okay, and I'm going to give a couple little tips and tricks on how you can get the exposure just right. And of course, there are always some caveats to it, but one thing I like to tell people is that low is mo. Low is mo. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So all right, so what do I mean by low is mo? That means that the lower your number, the more light you're going to let in. And as I said before, there's always a caveat to that, because when you're dealing with a triangle, you have to make sure that everything is in balance, because if you mess with one thing, you got to mess with something else. So if you mess with this, you got to adjust it and balance it with this. So we're going to talk about the three things that makes up that exposure, which is the ISO, the ISO, the shutter speed, and then your aperture. Okay, so we're going to take them in little pieces, and I'm not going to make this real technical. It's going to be basic information, basic, so you can get it and go on out there and do your thing. So we're going to talk about the aperture. Now the aperture, it could depend on the lens. Well, it actually does depend on the lens that you're using. So the lens, there's a particular number on the lens, and that determines how much light is going to be let into your camera. So if you have a lens that's, let's say, a f1.8, a f2, or f4, then that is going to determine how much light is going to be coming in to your camera and your sensor. So with that being said, the aperture to me is somewhat important. Aperture actually determines or affects the background. So when you're looking, so I'm making this real simple, guys. I'm not doing any technical stuff at all. Okay, so the aperture, just think of the aperture as when you're looking at the background of your picture, or you're seeing the background, the blurriness of that background. The aperture will affect how much is in focus and how much you want to be out of focus or blurry. And we're calling this the depth of field. We all know that, okay? So I don't want to get into too much technicalities about it, but it's pretty much what's in the forefront and what's in the back. So front to back. If you're focusing on this is going to be in focus, but everything in the back, as my camera is doing now, is going to be out of focus. So, and we call that also the plane. If you're on the same plane, then things are going to be in focus. Once you start going back and getting off of plane, then on a different plane, then it's going to be out of focus. Now, that's your aperture, and the lens that you have definitely affects that. Okay, so you have your what's in front focus, what's in back focus, and depending on, you know, what you're capturing, what you're doing, you may want only things in the front to be in focus and stuff in the back to be out of focus. That blurriness, that bokeh, that most photographers like to have. But if you're wanting to have things more in focus, then you have to bump up your f-stop. So the higher that number, the f-stop, the less light that's going to be coming into your sensor, which means that it's going to be a little bit dark, okay, because you have a less light coming in, and your higher the number, the less light is going to come in. So low mo, lower the number, the more light is going to come in, and then you have to make adjustments with that. Okay, it all depends on what it is that you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. So for me to remember, the aperture has to do with focusing and what I want in focus. So, and your depth of field, or how what's in focus, what's in front of me, what's behind the subject. So definitely remembering that your aperture definitely depends on what you want in focus. Do I want a lot in focus, or do I want just a little bit in focus? So the second thing we're going to talk about is the shutter speed. The shutter speed. Shutter speed, to me, and how I will explain it, is that it depends on the movement. How much movement do I want to show? Do I want to show a lot of movement and freeze that movement? Or do I want to create movement and show the blurriness of the movement? And that, to me, is the shutter speed. So your shutter speed is all about time and timing. So if you're trying to capture and freeze time, freeze a moment, freeze an action, then that shutter speed has got to be fast. It has to be fast. Now for me, depending on what the person is doing, if I am, capturing little kids or something like that, then I may want the shutter speed to be at least over 500, 1 over 500. Okay, that bottom number has to be high. And again, with that means you're letting in less light. Okay, so your picture may be a little bit darker if you're going 1 over 500 and up, or even 1 over 200 and up. Again, with this, low mo. If that number is lower, then you're letting in more light. If it's higher, then you're letting in less light. So that means, again, you have to adjust the other things in your triangle to get the image correctly exposed. So for me, again, the shutter speed really depends on the movement. Okay, is my person stationary? If my person is stationary, then I'm good. And my lighting, because that all depends on it too, your lighting scene. So whatever your lighting is in the scene will definitely affect your triangle and how you will approach it, and how you will either, change one of these three things in order to get your image in the correct exposure. So for the shutter speed, I mainly think about it as movement. Am I freezing action? Is my person just stationary in the action? Or if they're stationary, then they're not actioning, but maybe they're slightly moving a little bit or whatever. But for portraits and things like that, if I'm doing portrait work, then definitely my subject is probably going to be stationary, and I don't have to so much worry about my shutter speed. I'm focused on one of the other two elements of the triangle. So next up is the ISO. The ISO is like a little, sprinkles. If you like sprinkles, then it's a little sprinkle. So for me, ISO is the determining factor. I try to keep my ISO as low as possible, and that means I'm going to keep it at 100. And ISO is just the light sensitivity. So if I'm outside and I have great weather outside, and for the most part, cloudy days are a photographer's dream. For me, let me just say that. For me, cloudy days is great because it's a big soft box in the sky. And so you don't have to worry about shadows or anything like that from the sun. But yeah, so normally if I'm outside, ISO is at 100. Automatically 100. And then will adjust for, the aperture and for the shutter speed, depending on what I'm doing. It also depends on the lighting situation. So your lighting environment, what are you doing in the environment? Is it dark inside? Do I want to adjust the ISO? And in adjusting the ISO, it may increase a little bit of grain. And now with the newer cameras, the grain is, you can push your ISO pretty high and not get a lot of grain, and the quality of the picture will still be really good. But you want to keep your ISO as low as possible. For me, I want to keep my ISO low as possible. So it all will depend on the scenario and the scene that I'm walking into. If I'm walking into a darker room, then I know right off the bat that, and I can't add any, lights, or if I can't add any more artificial lighting adjustments, then I know that more than likely I'm going to have to up my ISO. So for ISO, my ISO will definitely depend on the setting and my scene and what I'm trying to do in the scene. So if I'm trying to keep my ISO low, then I know that I'm going to have to definitely adjust the other things in the triangle. But if I just cannot adjust those other things in the triangle, the ISO is the last option for letting in light, more light into my picture. Learning that triangle and learning those three things and how those three elements all work together, because they work in conjunction with each other. Once you mess with one thing, you gotta mess with something else to make it balanced. Now, unless you are using one of your programmable modes on your camera, so you could be in aperture priority, you could be in shutter priority, and it will do the work for you. But I like to be in control, so I shoot in manual so I can adjust those things how I see fit. But again, just learning those three elements and basically just learning low is mo. The lower the number, the more light you're going to let in. But just remember that if you're adjusting one thing, then you probably are going to have to adjust, well, I'm not going to say probably, you will have to adjust another thing in order to balance it out. So I really hope that that was a little bit helpful and not confusing, because I know it can be confusing in photography. And there's so much jargon that, you hear. But for me, what has helped me along the way is learning low is mo. Okay? Low is mo. If you don't take anything else away from this, just know low is mo. Okay? All right. So I thank you guys for tuning in. I thank you all for watching. And definitely hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button, hit the comments, comment down below what are some of your tips and tricks for what you used when you first got started. Because to me, being a beginner, I knew nothing about this. Nothing about the ISO. What is that? The aperture. What is that? Oh, it's called the f-stop. Oh, okay. What is the shutter speed? Oh, why is this number like this? So definitely, I love the comment in the comment section and talk in the comment section about your tips and your tricks of how you remember things and how it just comes to it's second nature now for you. But for those that are beginning, how you started out and what are some tricks and tips that you used to help you along the way. So again, that is it. That's it. That's all I'm going to talk about. And until next time, I'll talk to you then.
Thanks for watching my GG channel. Period.